Hi, patrons.
Hey, patrons. It's good to see you a week later.
It's been another week. Nothing has changed over here. Um, cool. Oh man, yours is so good. Okay, that's great. Yeah, I think I'm pretty much good to go.
All right. I just gotta check one thing real quick. I gotta grab something. I don't remember where it is.
Xenoglossia. That's fantastic.
Right? It's like such great words. All right. Okay, there we go. All right. I am good to go, my friend.
Cool. All right. I am not apparently because I didn't actually start a new document or a new episode on here. Sorry, one sec.
No way to go.
Exported everything, so that seems fine. So just save it as a new thing. Ever since we talked about doing this episode, I have had thrice stuck in my head the one lyric is that speaking in tongues.
Man, I haven't heard that song in a long time. That band is so fun.
Yeah. They were one of my absolute favorites for so long.
All their new stuff is so grungy.
It is quite grungy. But Illusion of Safety was such my jam.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, I really liked Visu. I really liked Artist in the Ambulance. I really liked Beggars. I loved the Alchemy Index. Like it was super good stuff. And then they went on hiatus and they came back and it was like, wow, changed directions a bit.
Yeah.
Because I mean,
Yeah.
Illusion of Safety is so technically proficient. Just the guitars are doing so much just all over the place.
Oh yeah. It's all over the place. 100%.
Yeah. And by the time you get around to, I don't remember what came after Beggars, Major Minor probably. It was just very like down.
Yeah. It's a very different sound. I loved Beggars though. Like that one is so good.
Beggars is super good. Yeah, that's a
I
very
think I'm gonna
solid
listen to that
album.
after we're done recording today.
Should
I'm gonna listen to that while I'm cooking.
Beggars, the song Beggars and the track I think it's The Weight.
Yeah.
Are probably my favorite two songs on the album.
Yeah, that album is just unbelievable. Definitely one of their like more overlooked albums.
I think so. Yeah. All right, ready to go?
Let's do it.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your host, Abraham.
And I see, I thought you were going to do mine. I'm your blabbering host, Shane. I thought you were going to do the blabbering host and I was going to do that. And so that worked out so much better than I thought it would be. And I love that.
It's the shock value, my friend.
Gotta keep me on my toes.
Welcome, by the way. We're a psychology podcast. We talk about what people and animals and plants do and all the things that they do and why, and trying to explain it through the most conservatively, scientifically rigorous lens that we possibly can in a sort of casual conversation format. So if you're joining us for the first time, so happy to have you here.
Yeah. Do you know how hard it was to go at this topic from a strictly objective scientific standpoint? Because there's almost nothing on it. It was so silly.
It's an actual miracle. Just kidding.
Yeah, a lot of people do think that.
They do. Hard to unpack. I do understand that for sure. It is a weird thing that we're talking about today. And before we get into that, I would like to say that if you end up liking what you hear today, and even if you don't, you should just go leave a 5-star rating and a glowing review and subscribe. And if you really like it, then you can pick up some merch at our merch store, join us on Patreon, or you can sort of mad gab code why we do what we do into a gibberish language as a noun or verb or something, and we'd appreciate that. And I'll talk more about the ways you can support us at the end of this discussion. But today's episode comes out on, or today that you're hearing this, it should, if you're really on top of things, it is August 9th. And if you're a little behind, then yesterday or a few days ago or something, it was in fact National Book Lovers Day. So happy National Book Lovers Day, August 9th.
It feels like my day. It's also
It is.
National Hold Hands Day. Just to recommend washing your hands before you do that.
And after.
And after.
It is International Day of World's Indigenous People. Huge supporter of that. That's great.
Yeah,
supporter
I
of
love that
Indigenous
day.
people. Yep.
It's excuse me. Beep. It's also Nagasaki Memorial Day, which part of the day involves working with organizations to rid the world of nuclear weapons, which I like.
Deal. Yeah. That we're always doing that. That's part of our overall mission statement, I think.
Yeah. I think it's a good idea.
Related to what we do, it is National Psychiatric Technician Appreciation Day. I mean, tangentially related, adjunct, a little over here, but we're in the same ballpark.
But doing good work. So please keep doing good work.
Yes, please do.
It's also National Women's Day. Hey,
National Women's Day. We're not women, but we would like to acknowledge your day.
We support women.
Yeah. National Bargain Hunting Week. So go out there to those thrift stores and thrifty yourself some thrifts.
Mm-hmm. And also it's National Farmers Market Week. So get some deals there too.
That's great. It is National Psychic Week. Skip.
Or now it's National Dog Month, which I think is absolutely wonderful.
Love dogs. Family Fun Month, which I mean, it's theme parks, camping. I don't know, whatever gets
August is the worst time for that. It's so hot out.
It's so hot. Do board game night. That's what Family Fun Month is about. It's board game nights.
That's a much more fun. That's an August activity.
Yeah.
It's also National Catfish Month. So I don't think
people.
the online, don't catfish people, but if you like to eat catfish, I guess that's fun.
Yeah, sure. You got those bottom feeders. It is Black Business Month. So go out and support those Black businesses. I mean, do it all year round, but make it a point to really kick it off in August, I guess.
Yeah, maybe that's you set goals for doing more in that realm. It's also Peach Month. So I like peaches. I prefer nectarines, but I do like peaches. So celebrate those too.
Isn't Georgia known for the peach? Is that like a Georgia thing?
Yeah. It's the peach state.
Oh, okay, cool. So there you go. So Georgia's all about this, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they're all acting like butts, Yeah,
there you go. All right. Well, we're not talking about any of those things, including Georgia. Maybe inadvertently we're talking about Georgia. We're trying to answer two questions. What is speaking in tongues, and when did people start speaking in tongues? So we're talking about speaking in tongues.
So in this episode, we're going to figure out what Homer, Machine Gun Kelly, the Caudate, and Linda Blair all have in common.
You know how you can tell that Shane wrote an episode? Shane will weave a complex tapestry of interrelated topics from his research. It's really beautiful.
It's so fun.
I'm inspired. I need to do this more.
It brings me joy to find these weird threads. It's like, how can I make this thing tied to things that don't make any sense? I'm so glad that we were able to land on that. So let's talk about this thing, speaking in tongues. This is a topic that you brought to me last week. You're like, hey, I was thinking about this, and I was like, yeah, I'll do it. And then and I started doing the research this morning and came across so many things. It is so wild. So speaking in tongues, what is it? It's an event, an activity, or practice where a person will either utter words or speech-like sounds that are believed to be of a language unknown to the speaker. So basically what it is somebody starts speaking a language that they shouldn't know.
Now, is part of the definition here that it's also like not necessarily an exact language, but like maybe some kind of channeling of a religious language, or is that separate or tangential to the definition?
So that's the majority of like the context. It's like usually kind of like a religious practice, but there are some non-religious, I guess maybe not non-religious is the word, non-Christian examples of this that do exist, and I think we're gonna talk about those too. But yeah, it's typically found in like a religious or spiritual context.
All right. And so the really scientific term here for this phenomenon of speaking or uttering words or speech like sounds that are of another language that you do not speak is called glossolalia. Gloss comes from Greek glossa, meaning tongue or language, and lalia coming from the Greek lalio, meaning to speak, chat, prattle, or to make a sound. Some people may be familiar with echolalia, which would be to essentially mimic speech sounds or repeat scripted speech sounds or language.
Yeah. And so it's reported that speaking in tongues typically occurs during states of intense religious experiences. And people who experience this speaking tongues thing, people who experience it report that they lose conscious control of their vocal behavior. So essentially, what you'll find, and you've probably seen videos of people doing this. If you see like those really big mega churches where everybody's kind of dancing and like everybody seems like their body's out of control and they're kind of making a lot of noises, but it doesn't really sound like they're saying anything. That's typically what we're talking about when we are referencing speaking in tongues.
Yeah, you can also see this in the documentary Jesus Camp. They have some examples of this.
Almost referenced that for this episode.
Well, I threw it in there.
There it is. Yes.
So so the idea here is if they lose their control, then they're somehow channeling this language. And if the context is a religious one, perhaps they're channeling a spiritual or divine language of some sort. And this phenomenon isn't a new one. This with reports occurring as far back as Greek religions, roughly the 9th or 8th centuries BCE, and people sort of discovered they can just sort of word vomit sounds out without trying to control explicitly the direction of those sounds such that they then sound like words of their own native language. And
right.
And that struck people as being really incredible that they could make sounds with their face.
Yeah, so it's pretty incredible that people could do like, wait, that's a new sound that you made with your face. So a lot of the early descriptions came from Homer's writings, and so he would describe people that would be possessed by like deities and in the polytheistic type of place that they were.
This goes back to the bicameral minds that we did an episode on.
Yeah, it's pretty kind of, yeah. And it's pretty interesting. So like a lot of the descriptions are people kind of speaking languages or sharing thoughts or saying things that they shouldn't be able to. And that's kind of like what they're not supposedly like they're not supposed to be able to speak the language, but we'll see that that's not quite what it is. So there are also references to what they describe as ecstatic speech in the Hebrew Bible and cases of behavior that have been seen throughout Christianity sporadically. But what you'll find is it kind of happens in like very particular places, and we'll get into like what those circumstances are.
So speaking of Christianity, according to the New Testament, the first occurrence occurred among the followers of Jesus at Pentecost. From Acts of the Apostles to book 2, chapter 4. Is this a quote here?
This is
sorry,
it turns into a quote.
Yeah. Okay. Speaking in tongues occurred when, quote, all of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them the ability, end quote. Amen.
Amen. So basically what the description was that the followers of Jesus at Pentecost were able to speak languages that they couldn't because they were bestowed a gift or divine power, which was that's what speaking in tongues is, and we'll talk about it being a gift. So as a matter of fact, Apostle Paul specifically refers to speaking in tongues as a spiritual gift that is bestowed upon people, followers of God, followers of Christ, and all that. And Apostle Paul will refer to it as a spiritual gift multiple times in the Bible.
Now, centuries later, there appeared to be a resurgence of glossolalia with the Protestant revivals and the development of the Pentecostal church in the United States. And this, you'll actually see many of the priests, pastors, I guess, whatever the religious figurehead of these particular churches called. I'm not very good at my assigning like authority position to denomination repertoire, so I apologize for getting those wrong. And for not spending any time at all trying to look up and figure out what they were. But the leaders of these who specifically they also call this a spiritual gift. Like this same exact language came back around in this revival.
Yeah, and what you'll and it's just I think it's fascinating that of course it like is showing up a whole lot in the United States.
Right.
But yeah,
Specifically.
you'll find like a lot of the pastors and like the figureheads that are in these churches will pray for somebody and they'll start with something that is in tongues and then go into some kind of prayer that is easily understood by the verbal community around them. So so what you'll it's super kind of like fascinating to watch, just to kind of see what people can make up off the cuff. But
Yeah.
today, most occurrences are reported to occur within Roman Catholicism, Anglicanism, Lutheranism, and other more established denominations, but specifically looking at the Pentecostal church is like kind of the primary example of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you have this, get a video. Do you have a video that we could use?
I could pull one up real quick. Yeah.
So I figure if we can just share just the audio, and then if you can send me a link, I can download the audio and stick it into the episode. Or even I guess I can just pull it out of the audio itself, figure out.
Let's see. You want to get Pat Boone speaking in tongues? Let's see if this works.
Sure.
Sorry, there's an ad.
By Pat Boone speaking in tongues kit.
Oh yeah, this is a good one. Like this will work. Because the pastor is just like the whole time. There you go. I just sent it to you, so cool.
All right. So let me give this bullet point here.
All right.
Okay. So many of the video examples we wanted for this this episode show people making quick rhythmic sounds that are incomprehensible as language, but could easily sort of present as if they were a language. And typically, you'll find with examples of people praying in tongues or engaging in singing / dancing, also paired with the performance of their sort of tongues thing that they're doing. So let's actually just include here a quick clip of someone praying in tongues. You can hear sort of what that sounds like in case you didn't know already what this is going to sound like. So if I can do this and see, I assume you're not seeing my screen, but let's see if you hear the video.
We praise you, Lord. Thank you, Holy
Yeah, I can hear it.
Okay, cool. All right. Cool. So I'll be able to pull this out. So we're 14-ish minutes, 14 and a half minutes in this episode. Okay. All right, here's this clip.
Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Jesus. You've been so good to me, Harold Olives. Praise.
Praise you, God.
Well, if that disturbs you and it makes it sound like you're listening to a horror movie, you're not alone.
Yeah. Real. So you'll hear the one person in there actually like speaking the prayer, and then the father or the priest doing the speaking in tongues behind it.
Yeah.
Like to the you hear like kind of the sounds a lot, like that person going da, 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 da. Like that's the example of tongues in that in that video.
Yeah, and so as you said, he kind of immediately jumped into that, and so then the other guy sort of followed suit after a moment. It's sort of like, well, English apparently is not on the menu for today's prayer circle, so let me switch over to random speech sounds.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so I'll do okay. Beep. Well, speaking of speaking in tongues, we're going to let some advertisers throw some nonsense at you, and then we'll come right back with some why are people speaking in tongues? Why were advertisers speaking in tongues? We don't know. They just want you to buy stuff. And sometimes the art of confusion is the way to do it. But let's get back into our discussion. So What is going on here?
So there are a lot of arguments as to why, and what I learned as I was kind of doing this study or this like research was that most of the arguments are theological. So
Sure.
I'm going to give you those ones, and then we will spend a lot of time talking about the behavioral part of it. But there are a lot of these arguments about why somebody might speak in tongues, and then we'll just kind of share, and you can be the judge. At the time of this recording, there are a few theological explanations for why people might do this, and according to what are called glossalists. Which I thought that was great. Glossalists. They explain
Glossolalia or glossolalia.
glossolalia. Oh yeah, I guess it is glossolalists. You're right.
There seems like there's an extra A in
Glossolalia.
there. Yeah.
There's so many things. Yeah. So beep. So according to glossolalists, which is actually kind of fun to say,
Yeah.
they explain that the speaking in tongues is a divine gift or a spiritual gift, and that kind of goes back to what is said in the Bible and Apostle Paul and all that. Because the tongues themselves can either be real or unlearned languages. So that's something that's really important. It can either be a language that exists or an unlearned language. This can include things like language of the spirit or language of angels, which humans couldn't possibly know unless they were gifted with it. So a lot of times what you'll find, it sounds like gibberish because the person speaking it is speaking a language that humans do not have access to, right? That's what they're saying. And that,
Right.
according to glossolalists, that they are gifted this divine ability to speak languages that humans have not been privy to.
Sure. And side note here, which is kind of fun, is that the term for being able to speak an unknown or unlearned language is xenoglossia, which is also a very fun word to say.
Yeah,
and it does
I
make a lot
love
of
that.
sense. You can sort of see the etymological roots of those words as we've been given to understand them based on this discussion
Yes,
and just the word xeno by itself.
absolutely.
Is that cessationists?
Cessationists, yes.
Okay. Okay. Beep. There's also a group of people who argue against this, and these are called cessationists. Cessation, obviously, meaning to stop. And they believe that these spiritual gifts have not been given since early Christianity. Instead, it is believed that the ability to speak in tongues is not a miraculous gift, but rather a taught and learned behavior. So I think this is a group of Christians who essentially are believing that like speaking in tongues may have been real, but what's going on today is not whatever the real version of speaking in tongues used to be.
Yeah, that's probably the closest I'll agree with all of this. Is like,
Yeah.
it makes they're like, no. It's a learned behavior now, but it used to be real. I'm like, oh, you were so close.
Yeah.
But other folks believe that glossolalia does exist, but that it's a form of prelest. So now, if you're not familiar with what that is, prelest is essentially just the spiritual delusion. That's what they describe it as. And what they say, these other folks, they say that those who speak in tongues are tapping into some kind of spiritual power, just not the Holy Ghost, which is spooky. Also, I really like this idea, right? That this is a group of people who are Christians and go, yeah, you're definitely speaking in tongues and you're tapping into something, but it's not God, which would tell me it's like, but aren't you a monotheistic like religion? Like
Right.
like what are you pulling? Like what are you pulling? Like what are you doing? Like
Yeah.
what are you tapping into? Because that's scarier.
So you're acknowledging that there's some other power besides God, which seems sacrilegious, I think.
Or like contradictory, even like even if it's not
Yeah.
sacrilegious, it's just so contradictory.
Right.
Unless it's demons, which we'll talk about.
Sure. A final theological position is that speaking in tongues is actually not a Christian spiritual gift, but rather a folk practice. And through this belief, it is said that the cause of speaking in tongues is better explained by naturalistic means and often misattributed to the Holy Spirit. So still hear that people are speaking in tongues in a manner and sort of in a way, but not in the way that they think.
Right. And so with all that being said, let's get into the science behind this. Currently, glossolalia is classified as a non-neurogenic language disorder. This simply means that any alterations or challenges with language are psychosomatic rather than organic. So it's not like a brain injury. It's not like something has caused this person to be able to speak a different language. It's essentially saying these are all psychosomatic symptoms. These are all there's nothing organic or nothing as part of the hardware that's creating this type of issue.
Yes, and that actually does not mean though that this is a psychological disorder. Those who do speak in tongues are rarely, if ever, diagnosed with a specific psychological disorder. They're sort of treated as being like, you just have these hallucinogenic outbursts sometimes, and that's cool.
Yeah, yeah. Or they're going, you're doing this on purpose. This is a behavior that you've
Right.
learned in your congregation.
Right.
And that's actually most of what they've found. But
Right.
I thought this was kind of cool. So, according to a study conducted by Newberg, who's a neurologist around this, they found that brain scans showed strange activity occurring while someone was speaking in tongues. There's a direct quote from an interview about the study, and this is from James Cohen, who was kind of talking about this. Quote, the findings from the frontal lobes are very clear and they make sense, but the caudate is usually active when you have a positive effect, pleasure, and positive emotions. So it's not clear what the findings are. Essentially, what they found in the study was that while the frontal lobe and all this stuff was kind of still active, the caudate in particular was not. It was basically shut off. It was like switched off during like anytime somebody was speaking in tongues.
And for those of you who don't know what the caudate is, fun fact, the caudate is one of those areas of the brain where we know that the whole brain is involved in various aspects of our behavior, but this one is considered to be specialized in its involvement in motor and emotional control, and is located near the thalamus in the center of that gray pile between your ears. And so and so if you see that there is relatively low activity in an area that is associated with emotional control and motor control during the situation, then that sort of speaks to it's sort of freewheeling, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of basically like it's yeah, it's just like it's part of your brain is just not active in that moment. It's sleepy. It's a sleepy time. So your brain's just kind of going willy-nilly.
Sure.
Now, this study also found that there was greater activity in the parietal region, which is the part that, quote, takes sensory information and tries to create a sense of self and how you relate to the rest of the world. So basically, like you have no control, but your body is still seeking self in the context of the world, is what's happening while like neurologically while people are speaking in tongues.
And so it's kind of funny about this is that essentially the study found that these results that they observed neurologically were almost the opposite of those who engage in meditation. So with those speaking in tongues having no control but a greater sense of self, and specifically in relation to God.
Right. And people who are meditating had like no sense of self, but they had greater control of how they directed their meditations.
Yeah.
Super fascinating. So all right, I guess maybe it's probably worth, do you want to speak in tongues? Would you like to learn how?
You're here now, presumably you want to learn how to speak in tongues. I mean, sure. We can be students and teachers here.
So my favorite thing about going over the WikiHow, I guess is what is how it's pronounced, which is like a step-by-step. It gave a step-by-step process on how to speak in tongues. But
Beautiful.
Throughout it was like my favorite lines were like, if somebody doesn't agree with you, just don't talk to them about it.
That's a good line for a WikiHow.
That came up so many times. So if you're not sure how to start speaking in tongues, we've got a tutorial for you. But here's how we're going to start. Step 1, place faith in God's salvation plan at the forefront of your mind. So as we're walking through this, God's salvation plan is in the front and center of your mind as we explore this.
Step 2, study the Bible to learn what it says about speaking in tongues.
I don't have a Bible near me, but I know that Apostle Paul is the guy to go to, apparently. Step 3, build the confidence in yourself to speak in tongues. I think I can. I think I can.
Step 4, create a distraction-free environment around you for best results. Closet, shed, crawl space might do fine.
Cult house. Step 5, start by making simple monosyllabic sounds. And they actually show a couple that are like ka, ba, da, si. Like they had a couple, like they had an infographic on there that showed different sounds you can make.
That tracks. Okay, good.
Or use the EESA from the VB map. You could just use that, I guess.
There you go.
You need to assess.
Step 6, listen for repetition or hints in the sounds that you are making, which is a good thing, apparently.
Step 7 is try praying those words or sounds that seem to pop up in your head. So basically, if a sound pops up in your head, just make that sound as you're praying.
Step 8, ask for increased faith to reinforce your devout mindset.
So if you have your dice with you, go ahead and roll for increased faith, and you should be
mindset faith check. Must roll a 4 or better.
Yeah. Use your 8-sided dice. Now, there are a few things to consider so that your practice doesn't waver. First, please note that God doesn't force you to speak in tongues. It's not it's willing. It's not coercive.
Also, try not to overthink or feel discouraged about speaking in tongues. We cannot stress enough how little thinking you should be doing.
And then finally, avoid talking about this prayer method with people who don't accept it. So that's the number 3 thing to remember. If people don't accept it, you don't got to talk to them about it.
Yeah. Number 4, if someone's criticizing you, put your hands in your ears, close your eyes, and go la 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 la. I can't hear you, la 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 la.
Which is a version of speaking in tongues, technically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you get to speak in tongues and avoid distraction.
La, 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 la. That's the best. That's the best thing that has come out of this episode is the idea that, like, in order to stop talking to people about speaking in tongues at them with your fingers in your ears, and that will immediately stop that conversation.
Yep. Perfect. Please don't do that to us if you happen to encounter us.
I mean, if you did, I would just laugh. I would appreciate that. So maybe that's gonna be the next shirt, where it's just somebody going la 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 psychology rules.
All right. Well, let's do our best to dig in with what we can in terms of what there is to say about this from a sort of a psychological, scientific view. I mean, we kind of have by breaking down the neurological aspects, but a little bit more above that, I think, is the way to go.
Yeah, so it's not an uncommon practice. Like, this is something that people do all over the world in different spaces, but it's unknown how many people in the world actively practice this, partially because they don't tell anybody. They do the opposite of vegans. But it's discouraged to speak because people are and so, because if you're CrossFit and you're vegan, we know, but if you're speaking in tongues, we definitely don't know. But it's discouraged to speak about this with people who are uncomfortable about it. So people are not going to kind of do this. Or if it's going to happen in a communal space or in private. And so where the practice happens most often is inside Pentecostal churches. But it does happen in other spaces.
Yes. Real quick, it's just occurring to me. You know how to tell if someone is a bicyclist or a runner?
How?
They'll tell you. So as you were just saying, although this was largely sort of revived in these Pentecostal United States based sort of circles, it does exist outside of the Pentecostal church and takes the form of theonoustic glossolalia. And that was not me speaking in tongues. That was me reading real words. Just sounded like tongues.
I think if you just read scientific jargon, it would sound like it would definitely sound like speaking in tongues.
Yeah. So there's that. It can be found in spiritual practices related to paganism, shamanism, and other religious practices that include these mediumistic qualities, which does, kind of make sense. As we said, when we were looking at the historical roots of this, there was this sort of level of being enamored with the fact that we can make random speech sounds, and that seemed striking to those who saw speech as being such organized sense, making sense toward a type of behavior that we all do.
Yeah, as I was kind of starting to think about this, I was like, there's so many times where I am catching myself talking to myself in private while I'm working on something, but I'm saying words, right? I'm not just kind of going, blah, 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 blah. I'm not talking like a sim, right? And so and I think that's something that's a real but I think it's really important to remember that. And so what a lot of people have done is when they've started looking and evaluating this kind of this experience or this phenomenon, what they started looking at were kind of the language and the sounds that people were making. And the first thing they discovered was that the pseudo language that was being spoken actually lacks meaning and has no contextual relevance, which is really important for language, right? Language typically has some kind of context, some kind of meaning, syntax, all of these things, and it has context. It has somebody else that I can can actually talk to, and they kind of mediate and reinforce or reward my speaking behavior. And so that's not happening here in the same way. Essentially, what's happening is the sounds that are being made are non-functional sounds. They're just kind of sounds and babbling just because. And
Yes.
and from that verbal behavior standpoint, and this is really important to think about, if the person is speaking a language that nobody else can speak or understand, they are a verbalizer without an audience. Like they are
Yeah.
essentially engaging in a behavior without a group of people to understand what they're saying and to mediate that reinforcement, other than going, what are you saying right now? Which is a different kind of maybe reinforcement. And so what ends up happening is the language, these sounds kind of lose a functional effect. They don't have the same type of effect that members of a verbal community might have. Like, if you and I are speaking the same language, I can reward your verbal behavior and vice versa. But if I'm speaking the language of angels and nobody else around me does it, then they can't reward the behavior in the same way.
Yeah, so it's a very, very important point that I think we need to spend just a second here on, which is, and you said that this is a verbalizer without an audience. I would amend that slightly to be a vocalizer, because if we equate verbalizing with language, they're not speaking a language. They have no feedback from themselves or anybody else that anything they said has any grammatical sense or meaning. They couldn't tell you what they said, and they couldn't tell you consistently what they said. If you went through to decode what they did say relative to what they interpret themselves as saying, there would be no match in the sort of grammatical structure of the sounds that they made relative to the things they believed that they were communicating, if anything, which oftentimes is not anything. It's just sort of, I was just communicating like a feeling,
Right.
And so this becomes because it happened with their mouth doesn't make it language or verbal behavior. It's
Right.
like I could flash my hands around and that could be like speaking in tongues sign language edition, and that wouldn't mean anything to anybody who would like learn sign language, because just because I'm waving my hands out in the air doesn't mean that I'm even replicating the language structure system that is sign language. So it's like it's not even fair to call it verbal behavior or language. It's just stuff I'm doing, and the part of my body I'm doing it with happens to be my face, and specifically my mouth and tongue. Or as I said, I could be gesticulating wildly with my hands, and they kind of functionally all do the same thing, which is that they're not really doing anything that's not just self-stimulatory.
Right. Exactly.
And that rules out the
now,
piece of this being like a language, as you sort of said, like they're saying they're speaking some other language, but they're not. Like this sort of rules out that part of it.
well, and that's the magical thinking piece that like you'll hear a lot. Is like, well, somebody will go, well, how do you know if they're speaking the language of angels and you're not privy to it? Well, you're sure, but like that, like you could do that with any number of things. It's not a good argument. It's still not language, and I think that's an important kind of, it's always funny how people will kind of finesse that a little bit.
And if that's the case, how do you know you're not speaking the language of the devil?
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're going to talk about. That we're going to get into that. Also, what you'll find is that a lot of the speaking in tongues is usually rhythmic or poetic. It seems like it's kind of got like a musicality or a flow to it. But what they have found in their analysis is that the sounds that the people are making when they're speaking in tongues specifically is very similar, extremely similar to the speaker's native tongue. Basically, what they're finding is that it's pretty rare, if it happens at all, that the sounds that the speaker is making are differing from their native language. And you might be going, well, the human mouth can make all the sounds. Sure, they can, but there are plenty of languages that I cannot mimic. I can't pick up like certain accents or certain enunciations, and that don't come naturally to me. It takes a lot of work for me to do that. And what you find is that a lot of people who are speaking in tongues don't usually create new sounds that they normally wouldn't say or use.
Yes, critically important part also. And as you said, and sort of to expand on what you were saying there for a moment, is that there are certain sounds that will occur in certain languages that if you don't practice those early on in life, I've heard it said that you start to shape sort of your mouth and the muscles in your mouth around certain sounds. And so if you haven't picked that up by the time you're sort of in adulthood and having cemented that language as part, and the sounds of that language as part of your vernacular and what you can make, that it becomes nearly impossible to exactly reproduce those sounds. You can get close, like it'll sound like it, but you just will never quite say it because you have never generated that mouth position before. And so getting
Right.
there is like nearly, if not completely impossible. Yeah, you would think that, well, if it is in fact something that is channeling that is outside of language, then the sounds that you make should not be directly related to your own language and can include sounds that you would think that your mouth couldn't make. But it doesn't. It
But it
only
doesn't.
includes sounds that you natively include in your own language and never includes sounds that are outside of that. So, yes.
So I think that's a pretty powerful argument against it. But I think it's important, and I think that's probably one of my favorite points about this. But I don't know. So speaking of sounds from your native language, here are some advertisers.
Our native language in this case is capitalism.
I speak in money, my friend. I speak in money.
That's right. Money talks. Put your money where your mouth is, and other idioms about money.
So
all right.
ridiculous.
There is another thing here to consider, which is that it's possible that there are some notions or original notions of the idea of speaking in tongues that was hearing other people speak in language that a person just didn't know and not knowing that they were speaking another language. And I will share a quick personal story of like the first time I heard someone speaking Persian, it was just so different from any language that I had heard that to me, I was like, I couldn't even pick out what sounded like grammatical units. And that's purely a function of my untrained ear having never been exposed to that pattern or sounds before. And not at all, like I think it's a beautiful language, and no criticism of it whatsoever. I think Persian sounds really cool and hear people speak it. It was so different from anything that I had heard that I had trouble picking out like what are the units here? Like where is like it just didn't I couldn't find the rhythm because I wasn't used to it. And so I could imagine someone hearing something like that, just a totally foreign language, and not being able to discern that there are consistent grammatical units that have functional relevance, and instead sort of think like, wow, that's just like, wow, people can make sounds like that in that pattern. Weird.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a really important point to make in all of this too, is that there are so many times historically where people will encounter a language or like either spoken or written that is so unique to them that they can't possibly understand it. I mean, all you got to do, if you have not watched Trevor Noah's stand-up, and whenever he talks about like some of the languaging around like where he grew up, and he uses like some of the I pardon my ignorance, but some of the languaging where it's got some of the clicks and some of those types of noises, that's part of kind of the syntax and the sounds that are made. It's just such a different experience. Yeah. So when you have somebody, when you've never been exposed to that, like we know enough to know like, oh, that could be languaging. We don't know. But like there was a period of time where like, I've never heard that. And then it just ends up being Japanese, you know? And it's like, but that's happened.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Now, behaviorally speaking, it is possible that similar to things like dancing plagues, we see a group of people engage in a behavior that seems to produce some kind of reward, divine reward even. And between the value of connecting with God, that like I have a value of like, I want to get closer to God, and then seeing other people say, hey, they're close to God because they're engaging in this particular behavior, i.e. speaking in tongues, it makes sense that a congregation, usually a smaller congregation, may be overcome with this type of behavior, and you start seeing more and more people within this congregation engaging in this behavior and this practice as part of their kind of their spiritual quest each week. And so it makes sense that there's that piece of like that group learning, the observational learning, and like the reward that comes along with engaging in this kind of behavior.
Yeah, so it might set up the occasion where someone then tries it and then gets a lot of positive feedback from the community of people who are also trying it. And I mean, there's no standard for what it is. So it's like, if you do anything at all, it probably counts. And then as long as you feel good about it, that's enough to say the spirit has moved you, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Mendes, Hesselden, and Costello in 2013 discuss foreign accent syndrome, which is usually the result of an acquired brain injury. And it's kind of exactly what it sounds like. If someone might receive a head injury and suddenly they're speaking in their normal language, but using sort of a different accent, And maybe we should do a whole episode on this at some point, but that could be a thing that occurs, is that damage to a part of their brain might result in their language sounding like it has a unique sort of accent, inflection, or even like pattern to it.
Yeah, it's not like I get hit in the head and I can suddenly speak fluent Japanese. That's not what it is.
Yes, that's
It's
never
it's
happened.
the equivalent of like, yeah, that's never happened. It's the equivalent of like me getting hit in the head and then waking up and going, "Oi, mate." Well, oh, why, isn't it? Like that would be that's what it would be. It'd be like me like starting to speak with a British accent.
Yes, yeah, that sounded like an Australian one maybe, but
G'day, mate. Oh, shrimp on the barbie. Oh God, I should stop doing that. You can cut all that if you want, Justin. You don't have to put any of that in there. That was really fucking terrible.
it reminds me of those montages that like John Oliver and others have done, where it's like the news on some holiday, they all decide to pick up some kind of like, I don't know, pay homage to, if you will, some culture, and they're like, they all do the exact same thing. So like St. Patrick's Day, every news anchor in the country says "top of the morning" to you.
Yep, that's exactly what I just did, and I'm so sorry for that. I take it back.
It was funny though,
right.
to like the sort of step back meta acknowledgement. I think maybe makes it funny. I don't know. We'll listen back and decide if we want to keep it.
Yeah. We'll see how it goes. So Carrie Kalai and Seago in 2020, and I thought this was really important. Glossolalia can exist without the presence of psychopathology and can be ruled out as a form of mental disorder. So as recent as 2020, they're basically saying that speaking in tongues does not necessarily mean somebody is mentally ill. And it also means that it can be ruled out as a kind of a type of mental disorder, because it's really not. So I thought that was a pretty powerful statement and kind of like end cap on this specific phenomenon in terms of like whether or not it's like a psychiatric concern or not.
Yeah, that is a really important point. And there's this, because I think we're acknowledging that like someone who it just gets involved in the sort of the religious fervor and has no other behaviors that would otherwise indicate some kind of psychological disorder, that they then they learn this thing through observation, through coaching, through feedback from their sort of given audience. They observe and learn and then start trying to implement this thing. And so it looks a lot more like almost like a social activity, this sort of like a traditional sort of religious thing, like singing a hymn. They just do it not to music and not to language either, but they sort of learn it and do it in this community setting specifically, or as we sort of played in the clip, they might be on a park bench, and just sort of be doing it next to each other. So I think it's just important to, as you said, acknowledge here that like this is not meant, I don't think it's not at all accurate to talk about this as being sort of a mental health issue. It is very much a social sort of club environment type issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll have some other interesting tidbits here to unpack. One here is that this phenomenon has been showcased in plenty of movies for scary effect: The Exorcist and The Exorcism of Emily Rose, and Exorcist on Holiday, and Exorcist Goes to Christmas. They
Exorcist Goes to Jail.
Yeah.
Exorcist in the Wheel of Time, or the Dial of Destiny, or whatever the new Indiana Jones is.
Yeah, Exorcist Scared Stupid.
Exorcist Big Adventure, Big Top Exorcist,
Big Day Out. We'll stop. So they've used this idea of speaking in tongues to show how possessed the victims in these movies are, even though the real world examples are rarely linked to demonic possession, but just a thing that has happened.
Right. I mean, when you think about the phenomenon of speaking in tongues and being a spiritual divine gift, there's not really a lot of religious leaders that want it tied to demonic possession, right? So like if somebody is experiencing demonic possession, then they're probably not speaking in tongues. They are possessed by some evil entity and it's something else. But if they are not, and they're speaking in gibberish in a congregation, then it's okay. So
that's right.
I thought that was kind of a fascinating thing. Also, Megan Fox, famous celebrity Megan Fox, has been outspoken about speaking in tongues since she was about 8. She's kind of grown up around it, has reported seeing miracles and stuff. And she has been part of the Pentecostal church in Tennessee that would regularly engage in this practice. Machine Gun Kelly, on the other hand, still can't speak rhythmically since Eminem murdered his rap career with Killshot. he's lost that poetic and rhythmic,
So sad.
kind of, the phrasing. He's got no phrasing anymore.
Yeah. I did see
So-
one of the things on this too. One of the thing to include, I think, in what I would call the interesting tidbits. So as we've talked about this idea of it being a divine gift. And so some people will specifically preach that what this means is that only people who are in the church and of the right faith and having the right beliefs will be given the gift to speak in tongues, and they will not be able to manifest this if they do not belong to the right church and the right beliefs. And yet there was an example of someone I found on YouTube whose name is the Rabbit Atheist, who was formerly a congregation leader of some sort, who said, like, here, I'll show you, this is how you do it. And he just did it. And he said, like, I don't believe in God anymore, but I can still do this. And he said, presumably I shouldn't be able to, because the idea being that, like, he's lost his faith. He doesn't belong to the church. He doesn't believe in any of what is being said in that space. And yet he's able to sort of replicate exactly. And he even was able to say, like, here's an exact phrase I would commonly use, that had like some very specific speech sounds and patterns, because it kind of sounds, again, it sounds like words, like you kind of sound. And so basically what I got from him and from some others that I was reading about in preparation for this is that they will pick up on certain patterns of like sounds that they'll say in a specific order that do kind of sound then like they're using them as words, and they may even feel like they're using them as words, but again, they couldn't tell you what they mean. I mean, if you try and pressure them, then they'll probably come up with something, and then because they know how to say that thing in the same order every time, they'll probably say that they're saying that every time. But if it just on the fly, they wouldn't be able to tell you, because they're just making it up as they go, or they're just repeating back things that they've heard, or they might say that it can't be interpreted because of God and blah blah blah. So just whatever. There's always an excuse.
Right. So here's what I'm going to kind of maybe leave all of this with, is that the minions speak more language than anybody speaking in tongues. Like, the actual minions say real words, where speaking in tongues is not that. So there's just do with that what you will, I guess.
Yeah, that's fun. I enjoy that little nugget of wisdom there.
Yeah. I mean, I think probably the real takeaway is, like, for the most part, speaking in tongues is not like a dangerous thing. It's just like kind of vocal behavior that happens within a congregation. The real problem is, like, maybe if that congregation or that church is a problem, like, that's a different story. But that's not really what speaking in tongues does. It's just kind of a thing that some people do as part of like a religious practice.
Oh, I lost Shane so badly. Did the hurricane get him? Shane texted me, power surge, be back on in a second. Rare glimpse into the thrilling existence that is me without a co-host. So just sitting here looking at the screen. I was trying to come up with my recommendation because I didn't have one written down beforehand, which I usually try to do, but I just didn't this time. But now I've got it all settled. So Anyway, here I am. Sing your little ditty. Got my guitar here. I wouldn't actually do that to you. That would be cruel and unusual and punishment. But when Shane gets back on, just make some sounds for him. In the song, City in Color. The trouble with the transitions, you'll notice. There it is.
Oh, hey.
Hi.
Dude, am I like, it was one of those things in the mid sentence, my whole house just goes dark and then right back up. And I was like, I just knew that it was going to be a problem. So,
yeah, I assume it stopped recording then.
Well, I paused my recording.
Oh, okay. I probably should have done that. Oh, and then you paused yourself. That's fun.
Oh, no.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, wait, there we go. Okay.
It's funny because
Like,
it was like, pause my recording.
So stupid.
I was like, and then you paused yourself.
And then I paused myself. I paused life. Yeah. So silly. So silly.
All right. So I don't remember what you were saying now that when you left off, but
I was basically just saying that it's not a harmful behavior. Really.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think it's not. It's one of those things where it worries me about the indoctrination of people who don't know any better into these circumstances, where they wouldn't know how to tell the difference between whether they're being lied to or tricked or hoodwinked into something that doesn't do anything. And you know, arguably they might, you know, spend time and resources allocated toward this instead of something more useful when they're actually in a dire situation. Maybe there's probably a lot of the time that's not the case. They're just like, I'm just going to speak in tongue because it's Friday or Sunday or whatever.
Right.
And they just go to town. And it's like, yeah, it's probably not really harming anybody. It's just one of those like, how far do we encourage people to sort of pursue practices that we know are at the very least nothing?
Right. Well, and that's kind of my thought. As I where I see this being harmful is like that person that's in the church that is like watching everybody around them start to speak in tongues, and then wondering why God hasn't found them. Right.
Yeah.
Like
that's fair.
I see that being a thing, being like the biggest problem. Because I mean, I've had friends that have had like who, you know, like as an atheist myself, and I've had friends who have left churches to say that have always kind of said they were like, I thought something was wrong with me because God didn't speak to me. And I never understood what that meant. And I could see that kind of like being a side effect of this. So I think, you know, that's all. I think that goes back to being contextual, you know?
Yeah. So I think major take home point, speaking in tongues is learned. It corresponds to the language that you speak natively in terms of the sounds that you're going to make. And it is otherwise a series of just sort of sounds that people do.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much it. Nailed it.
Yeah. And is sensitive to social rewards, I guess.
Yes.
And like instruction, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see. Yeah, it's going to pop up in certain circumstances in those social situations that are going to get you a greater gain. But don't talk about it with anybody who doesn't like it.
Right. Shh. Hush.
Yeah. Yeah, be hush hush about it.
All right. Well, we like to always recommend some things. We like to talk about things that have brought us joy that we think will bring you joy, and it's just a fun thing to like to throw at the end of our episode, and we call it, appropriately enough, I think, recommendations. And so we're going to do that. But first, I'd like to tell you that if you like what you heard today and would like to support us, you can do that by heading over to Patreon. And you go to Patreon and you join us, you get all these access to perks and benefits and that sort of thing. And then we also will shout you out every episode, such as this group of lovely people, which includes Mike M, Megan, Layla, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, and Brian. All of you, thank you as always for your continued support and help of us.
Love
we
y'all.
Really appreciate it so much. And if we get a few more people to sign up for this, then we'll probably set up something where I'll hang out with y'all in like a live hangout just for fun, just for funsies.
Yeah, just to say hi.
Yeah. So you can go over and do that thing. You can also support us by going to our merch store, picking up some merch. You can leave us a rating and review and subscribe. If you'd like to talk to us about something that we've said about speaking in tongues, and you can leave us some glowing praise and feedback, you can email us directly at info@wwd.podcast.com. You can also reach out to us on all the social media platforms. I would also like to thank my team of people who helped make this happen. Thank you so much today, Shane, for recording with me and putting together the notes for this discussion.
Yeah, this one was fun.
So writing and fact checking are basically Shane and myself. I'd also like to thank audio engineering and production by Justin, and our social media coordinator is Emma Wilson, who have also just been amazing to work with, and a really great team of people.
Yes,
couldn't do it without us, without y'all. So
yeah, you couldn't do it without us.
That's right. Is there anything else that I missed, or anything I need to add before we get to our recommendations?
No, I think that feels good.
Okay, let's recommend some things.
Let's do it.
I am recommending, for those of you who have some kind of pet that you sometimes need to transport, probably like a dog sort of thing, there is this, I was looking around for something to help transport, because we've been in the position of having to do this, and the pets are kind of messy in your car. And so I found this thing called a Chew Major 6-in-1 dog seat cover for your car. And I put a link to that in the description here, but essentially it's a cover that goes over your back seat. And there's a lot of covers that exist out there, but what I like about this one in particular is it's very modular. So I can like unzip one side so that it hangs down, and so you're just kind of sitting on the cover, or I can unzip it completely and take it out, so there is no cover where you're sitting and there's just a cover where the dog is. You can set it as like a hammock, so it covers the seat, the back of the seat itself, and extends up to cover the back of the seats in front of it, and creates a little screen so that the animal can't get past the two front seats or up into the two front seats. And it's got like spots, it's got like little pockets to hold things you can put inside it. It's waterproof, and it's very affordable. So anyway, that's my recommendation, is if you're in the market for saving the back seat of your car, you could do a lot worse than the Chew Major 6-in-1 dog seat cover that I had the privilege of getting lately. So go check that out if you want something like that.
I love that. I'm recommending food. If you like food and you're in the Washington, D.C. area, there is a place called Bubby's Plant Burgers and Fizz. And I was so impressed with this place that I had to eat there multiple times while I was there.
Nice.
It's a food lab. So, and they have plant-based and kosher certified burger. It's like burgers and chicken sandwiches and stuff like that.
Wow.
But one of my favorite vegan treats that I have not had in a very long time are the chicken wings that are that have like the wooden like the bone end, quote unquote bone end. I love those, and there's no place around me that has them. This place had them, and they were so good. So they're known for doing like kind of weird flavor mixtures and stuff like that, but they had just brought back that day, because they have like a fried green tomato burger and stuff like that that's really good. But that day they brought back a peanut butter and jelly chicken nuggets, and it was fried chicken nuggets with a grape jelly glaze and like a peanut butter dipping sauce, and it was so good. Man. It was so good. It's at first you're going, oh, but like honestly, it's really, really great. This place was so good.
Yeah, the jelly part doesn't sound great with chicken, but I mean, I'd definitely try it. I mean, particularly peanut butter goes on everything. So
I think you would dig it. I think if you like peanut butter and jelly, you'd be like, I like this. Like, it's like, it's kind of the equivalent of like how chicken waffles works, where it's like the sweet and savory together. Like
Got
it does a similar thing there.
Yeah, I got it. I got you. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anything else to add or anything before we say goodbye to everyone, Shane?
Nope, that's all I got today.
Cool. I think that's what we have to say about speaking in tongues and plant burgers and dog seat covers. So as I said, reach out
Yep.
to us. We'd love to hear from everybody. Otherwise, this is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
It's gonna be a good 15 minutes of that episode that gets cut.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine.
But we got 2 more episodes in the bank. That's so great.
Yes, that is the amazing thing about this that I'm very thrilled about. So thank you so much.
Me too. I think I should be able to record 2 episodes next week too. So
Oh, kick ass. Love that. Sweet. So I'll try and have at least, maybe I'll prioritize the nostalgia episode. And then if I can also do one on top of that, like a full episode, then we'll either have 2 to record or 3 and a just the nostalgia one, which will really put us ahead. Or or you'll do, whatever. We have them in the bank now. So the more the merrier.
yeah, I think that's good. And then I'll grab another episode today. I'll pull that up and grab another topic today.
Cool. Yeah, let me know what jumps out at you.
Sounds good, my friend.
All right, dude. I will thank you again. Let's say goodbye to our patrons. Bye, patrons.
Bye, patrons.